So while one could, ask people to be conscious and take the clean solutions and so on, we will only solve the problem when these solutions become economically viable.
You are listening to Understanding the Future podcast. I am the host Punit Gandhi, and this podcast is developed in association with Climate Center for Cities under the National Institute of Urban Affairs and the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. This is a podcast where we discuss about the future of work in the field of climate change, urban development, innovation, and sustainability with the help of leaders and visionaries working on ground as well as in the top management of public and private sector. Our objective is to better understand the future so that we can be prepared and intervene to enable climate actions in the urban areas.
Hello everyone, I am Punit Gandhi, the host of the podcast Understanding the Future, and today we have with us Mr. Anirban Ghosh, Chief Sustainability Officer at Mahindra Group. Mr. Anirban will help us in understanding the future of corporate sustainability. Welcome to the show, Mr. Anirban. I think the first thing I would be interested in understanding is how does a conglomerate with 150 plus companies across 100 countries commit to EP 100 in 2016 and later to carbon neutrality by 2040. How did sustainability become one of the prime strategies for the growth of the company?
Actually, it is not as difficult as it sounds, Puneet.
Okay.
This program EP100 was conceived by the Climate Group sometime around 2015, I think.
Yeah.
And so when they brought this program to us and told us that we are asking corporations to commit to doubling energy productivity over a period of 25 years, we went back and checked that without making a commitment, what was the progress we were making anyway? Because there was some sort of a program in our large businesses already.
Yeah.
And we found that without making a commitment, reductions of 3 to 4% energy efficiency in a year, or let me put it in energy productivity terms, increasing energy productivity by 3 to 4% was not a very difficult thing to do at all.
Okay.
And we had enough experience without trying to scale up the work.
Okay.
And 25 years doubling energy productivity was roughly, I think, a high 2 point something percent in a year. So given that we had the track record, it was only a question of saying that we will continue and we will continue more rapidly than we were doing before.
Okay.
And I'm glad my colleagues took up the challenge and we committed to doubling energy productivity.
Yeah. And then to carbon neutrality, because that is where now higher goal comes in.
That took a little bit of time. So I still remember after coming into sustainability, after understanding the whole thing and realizing that, you can only really say that you are doing something significant if you start moving towards becoming carbon neutral, because that's what the whole world has to be.
Yeah.
I remember having the first conversation with our managing director, and he said, see, up to now you were in business, now you've gone to sustainability, so you think all this is possible just like that, is it? So I told him that, it sounds more difficult than it is, and I'm talking to you about it because I'm seeing that this is really not impossible to do. And not many people are talking about it in the corporate world as of now, but I think it would be a very strong signal to send out. Of course, that day he chased me out of the room, but it opened the conversation. And I think about a year later, when we were going for the Global Climate Action Summit in San Francisco, we went back to him with more numbers and how we were going to achieve it and so on. By that time, actually, the EP100 work had happened at scale. So we'd
Okay.
already experienced how emissions could be reduced. We
Yeah.
all of us knew that renewable energy will also reduce emissions. So
Yeah.
it was a question of a little bit of long-term planning, which we did, and
Yeah.
shared it with him. And he said, "Well, if this is the way the whole thing will evolve, then I think we should say yes to being carbon neutral by 2040." Now, since we were doing this, when was GCAS? 2017. So, since we were doing this for GCAS, at that time, clarity on scope 3 was not very high.
Okay.
So we said, okay, let's at least commit for scope 1 and scope 2.
Yeah.
And as going forward, we will learn. And if we figure out what to do in scope 3, we will add that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's how it has to be done. So, like, if I have to take any company, I would look at it that, okay, and we want to go sustainable. One is your employees, and then comes your suppliers, and then comes the consumers as well. So, I think, how did then your employees first start reacting to this whole mechanism? Because that would also mean that they had to perform in certain ways and certain standards.
So employees are like you and me now, Puneet.
Yeah,
And we are hearing this conversation all around us.
true.
Um, it's not, and there most of us understand that yes, this is a problem, this has to be solved, emissions have to be reduced. And
Yeah.
if we get a chance to do this at our workplace, it's a fantastic opportunity. That's how most of our colleagues have taken it. Every time a colleague of ours gets an understanding of how he or she can contribute in this climate journey,
Yeah.
they're happy to do it because they can see it makes a difference, it can be done, and there's always help around the corner.
Yeah.
So it was, I won't say it's not difficult to get colleagues along, but you do have to find a way to help them understand what they can do in their workspace and in their life to
Yeah.
be able to reduce emissions and why that is not impossible.
Okay. And any specific things or programs that were carried out to help them in this journey?
So in the personal space, there are 12 things that we've suggested they do. In fact, I sent out a summary mail just this morning.
Okay.
And that includes making all the lights LED in their house. There's a new one, change all the fans to brushless DC fans.
Yeah.
They are
Yeah.
amazingly energy efficient. Then, energy efficient air conditioning. Then putting aerators on taps, using low flow fixtures,
Yeah.
using those two button flushes,
Okay. Yeah.
dual flushes, and so on. So we've given them a list of 12. We said, do whatever you find is possible for you, but just keep taking steps forward. But that's
Yeah.
that's in their own lives.
Yeah.
At the workspace, depending on which function they're in. So the operations guys work very hard on energy efficiency and renewable energy. The
Yeah.
finance folks work hard on making sure that funding is available, making sure that investors are engaged in the conversation, doing
Yeah.
integrated reporting. They're
Yeah.
looking at climate risks now. So these are all the things that our colleagues in finance are doing. And as and when more tangible actions are required from a sustainability perspective by finance people, we will take them along and show them, okay, this is what needs to be done and why this makes sense for the business.
Yeah.
Very soon, I'm sure they will start being proactive and
Yeah.
start taking leadership on their own once the subject becomes clearer. Similarly, for every function, there is a value proposition that if you do this, you will be
Yeah.
able to do your job better. That's it.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. That sounds, at least awareness campaigns have gone through this, so that in each sector, once they also start becoming more sustainable, the output might come on its own as well. We do not have to do a lot of hard pushing on those lines.
Hmm.
And then coming towards the supplier end, because there are 150 plus companies, a lot of operations of Mahindra is also on lines of manufacturing. So I'm sure there is a full list of suppliers, thousands of suppliers. How do you make sure that those also become more and more sustainable?
Everything that we do in our locations and factories, our suppliers have access to in the space of sustainability.
Okay.
There is a fairly intense engagement with suppliers. The training courses, sharing of technology, sharing of impact, returns that we get from our investment, all of that happens on an ongoing basis with suppliers. Especially with those who cater to our automotive and farm business.
Okay.
They are by and large the largest suppliers. So when you talk about suppliers, there are all various kinds. So for the automotive business, there are some suppliers who are actually bigger than us. Their sustainability work, they're also leaders in the sustainability space. So we don't have to worry about them. Then there are some who are really tiny. And for them to get going, even if they did get going, their impact is not likely to be so high. So there's this large middle of about 400 odd suppliers who we need to focus on. Similarly, if I look at our tech business, then suppliers are people like Dell and HP and Lenovo and IBM and so on, who are doing amazing work on their own.
True.
So there's a set of suppliers we don't have to worry about. There are a set we haven't yet got to because they're small, and even if they did what we asked them to do, their impact will be less. But then there is the large middle where one has to work. So most of our programs are replicated there at their site as well.
Okay. And is there some kind of incentivization process for them to do or take up sustainability, or at least that's a thought process that is there in the company to give in the future?
There are two ways they're incentivized. So there is a supplier performance program.
Okay.
If they do well in that, they get all sorts of rewards. And sustainability actions are a part of the evaluation process.
Okay.
So that's built into the regular supplier performance evaluation process. The second is actually one of the major reasons why most suppliers take up climate action very easily. And that's because it helps to bring down system costs. So it keeps them competitive. And at the time of negotiations, they are in a position to meet the requirements of their OEM. So these are the two ways in which they directly benefit, at least with us. I know that in the supplier ecosystem, there are many OEMs who, especially the ones who are from other countries, getting business is contingent upon a certain minimum level of ESG performance. So many of our suppliers are actually happy to listen to us, because if they do what we ask them to do, they are then able to access business elsewhere.
Okay. And so do you have like some kind of best practices or something on these lines, so that others outside of company could also kind of, take it up, especially the smaller suppliers, because big companies do have resources to do such things. But smaller suppliers is where I guess focus also needs.
Funded India's largest supply chain sustainability program. It is run by the Institute for Sustainable Communities. Their mandate was to help suppliers learn about the benefits of climate action and how they could use it in their business. What began as a capacity building program then went on to, where they would visit locations, identify energy efficiency, renewable energy opportunities, help build the business case for it, and get them to adopt energy efficiency and renewable energy. So that was one way in which the practices that we had have got deployed to suppliers, initially to the automotive industry, now to other industries as well.
Okay. And then coming to the part where we are going towards the new businesses that have been set up now, especially with energy or electric vehicles and everything. Any specific business models that have come up which are very new and interesting and which are not thought of before, but just because sustainability at the core now, that becomes a more prominent business model?
The businesses itself are interesting and new. And, things like waste to energy, I think the nation is still figuring out what the model should be.
Yeah.
So every unit in every different state seems to have its own rules and regulations and manner of interaction with the municipality and so on.
Yeah.
Being a federation of states and being a democracy has its own challenges.
True.
Sometimes you would think that a certain degree of standardization would help scale up faster, but you have to take the ecosystem as it is.
Yeah.
So businesses like waste to energy, like food waste to energy, like crop residue to energy, businesses like micro irrigation is an old business, so I
Yeah.
can't really call it new. But green buildings and automobile recycling and so on, these are all new businesses which are trying to figure out what is the most effective way to work.
Yeah. And so I remember reading and actually attending one of the presentations about automobile recycling. And that was one of the first that Mahindra, I think, got it in India as well, that we want to create systems which are as much recyclable as possible. So how was that whole design taken up into consideration? Because that is, I think it starts with the design and then only it can go ahead. So how did that come into picture?
So, when you start with design, you're creating a good future.
Yeah.
But the reality we are facing today is that there are many vehicles which have high emissions, which are on the streets, which need to go off the streets if we want to improve our air pollution situation.
Yeah.
So in Delhi, you can't register cars which are more than 15 years old, I think.
Hmm.
And while that legislation has not yet spread to the rest of the country, one would expect over time it will.
Yeah.
And not because only of the age, but it's just that the whole technology has changed and you can get far more fuel efficient vehicles and vehicles which are much cleaner
Yeah.
than they were 10 or 15 years ago. So those vehicles, when they go off the road, you can't just leave them by the roadside or let the police pick them up and throw them somewhere. You can't do that, right? So you've got to figure out a responsible way of recycling them. And this is I think it's a big opportunity for the nation in multiple ways.
Yeah.
One, of course, is to reduce emission. The other one is resource efficiency. I mean, all that material that's sitting in a vehicle that is being scrapped,
Yeah.
it is eminently reusable. So I don't see why you should just throw it into the nearest river or nala or whatever water body you have, which is what we tend to do now.
Yeah.
And which is why we were happy to partner with the government. It's a joint sector company and do India's first experiments on automobile recycling.
Yeah.
And I call it an experiment because, there is no reverse logistics channel into the factory. You and I are not going to drive our old car into the recycling factory and say, here's material for you. So how do they get their material? Who do they align with? And then at the same time, so suppose you do get the material, then the ecosystem to responsibly recycle everything that is there in an automobile or has been put into automobiles all these days, that's an ecosystem that's not yet developed. So again, a lot of experiments on how to deal with the materials, how to get value out of it, how to reuse. So these are all things that are being explored right now. I'm glad they are because the more we explore them, a time will come when we'll be ready to scale.
Okay. And you also got in one of the, you also got into the sector of second-hand cars, because that was till now, like a lot of, for a long time, it was mainly managed by people locally. That was not taken up by many big companies like this, or startups had not come into that space. Now that field is also increasing a lot. Uh, any specific reason for that? Because that again is just helping us increase the longevity of the car, but at the same time, there must be some good dynamics behind it.
So that business started before sustainability became a buzzword.
Okay.
The reasons why it started then were the fact that the used car industry was probably as big, if not bigger, than the new car industry.
Yeah.
And buyers who wanted used cars typically were in an informal ecosystem. And it was not, we didn't have the pre-owned, pre-certified ecosystem in India. And therefore, it was a step towards that, to have pre-certified used cars, which has
Yeah.
gone through quality checks, which carries a warranty, and where you can come back for service. Otherwise, you buy an old car and it is a little ram bharose.
Yeah.
In fact, I remember we've had a lot of old cars in our family, because my father used to buy a 1929 Austin, the 1950
Ooh,
Vauxhall,
nice.
the 1955 Fiat,
Yeah.
and we had all those cars, and all of them were bought pre-owned and used.
Yeah.
And there were times when we got a lemon, and there were times when it worked fine.
Yeah.
So effort to get into used vehicles or pre-owned vehicles was to bring a certain degree of quality standards into that business.
Okay. Then coming again a step back and looking, because of all the variety of industries do you have, how do you think circular economy integrating into each other? Because I feel that is one big measure that any big conglomerate can easily get into. It's easy. It might be an easy access to a lot of resources, which otherwise might be more difficult. So where is the thoughts of Mahindra Group on that?
If we use the lens of resource efficiency
Yeah.
rather than say circular economy, it's very easy for a business to understand that what are the various ways in which you can be efficient with resources, and what do you look at as being a resource. And if you throw the word waste out of the window, then understanding resource efficiency becomes even more easy. So the conversation we were having on automobile recycling
Yeah.
use the lens of resource efficiency, and you can see that you don't want to throw away the resources that are already there.
Yeah. Okay.
And similarly, managing waste in a factory and creating value from it. The lens of resource efficiency actually makes it very simple and very easy for a business to identify opportunities going forward.
Okay. So as Mahindra Group, it already has a good amount of target that, okay, what happens in next 20 years and how those can be done. And you have said that it's fairly simple, but still I'm assuming there will be some amount of complexity and challenges that you would have faced or are facing or would face in future. Those are still not figured out yet. So if you could share with us some of those, that would be great.
See, the one challenge which I think is the real challenge is to help colleagues understand that if they adopt climate action or sustainability practices, they can actually do their business better. Because the dominant paradigm is that this is an additional activity, this is for the environment, this is not necessarily directly connected to business.
Yeah.
That is the paradigm from which sustainability conversations typically happen.
Yeah.
And therefore, for me, the only challenge is to get a peer or a colleague of mine to see how sustainability action actually helps him to perform better in the job that he's doing.
Yeah.
And once we cross that hurdle, there are no more challenges after that. And let me just cite one anecdote from our experience.
Yeah.
When I came into this function, and before I'd come into this function, we had a sustainability department for almost 6 or 7 years. So there was work happening, reporting, disclosure, energy efficiency, and so on. And I saw that we'd done some 100 odd projects over 5 years' time. And each of those projects gave returns in excess of 24%.
Yeah.
And it was never easy to get projects passed by capital expense, by the capital investments people, because we didn't get projects which would give us returns of this kind.
Yeah.
New product projects, many of which I've had to work on, we would start on IRRs that were really low, sometimes negative, and then catch up over time to reach the hurdle rate. So when I saw this bunch of projects sitting over there, which had given us returns of more than 24%, the logical question was, how much more can we do of this kind?
Yeah.
And when we started identifying more and more projects, so then we said, okay, then the sustainability department's job is not to negotiate to get projects passed. Our job is to identify projects, and we should identify as many as we can, because if the returns are this good, then my colleagues in finance will give us the money.
True.
And so we started identifying more projects. I went and spoke to our CEO at that time and told him, look, this is a portfolio of projects that have been done. This is the returns you've got. And we can get many more projects like this, and they will keep giving returns like this. But our problem is we don't have access to money.
Yeah.
So he said exactly what I thought he would say, that if you have projects like that, you let me know. I will see that you have the money.
Yeah.
And that's what led us to increase investments in climate projects by a factor of 10 in a period of 1 year.
Wow. That's a huge factor.
Yeah, I mean, it just made sense for the business to invest there. No?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, that's true. So looking at how certain industries like telecom have started the whole system where more and more industry players have only made the benchmarks in those industry to make it more favorable for everyone in the ecosystem. And then government does intervene. In India, there is something like this on lines of Greenco for sustainability. And CII has led it. FICCI also has a couple of projects on these lines. Do you think more conglomerates can come in together to make sure that such kind of sustainability can be raised across every bar in all kinds of industry?
You know, all conglomerates for the country engaged through CII and FICCI already.
Okay.
And multiple fora being created to bring even more companies into the area for climate action. There is consistent conversation on MSMEs, and now I see some of the associations that work with MSMEs also getting into the act.
Yeah.
However, when you say standards, I want to just make one differentiation. In climate action, it's more about ambition, commitments, and action. Standards happen, let's say in the electric vehicle industry, we need standards on batteries. We need standards on the connections themselves. Okay. Because if you don't have standards and every manufacturer comes up with different types of connectors like cell phones, they're all going to be in trouble. Okay, for no reason at all, we will have complexity in the system. But when it comes to climate action, standards is for, let's say, energy efficiency. Yeah. How would you know that this is the most energy efficient or not? So there you will need standards. And there people like Bureau for Energy Efficiency have done a wonderful job in bringing those star ratings into appliances and so on. So long story short, I think the ecosystem in India is doing fairly well. Yeah. People are engaging. There are best practices out there for anyone to access if they want to. I think we will get a lot of traction if we actively go out and enroll more organizations to take climate action.
Okay. Yeah. And then coming to a couple of now the last questions on lines of how do we enable those climate actions? And one of the first is on the lines of how can big conglomerate like Mahindra help in developing more startups and entrepreneurs to help them in creating climate actions? One is through startups and entrepreneurs, and another I feel is also through intrapreneurship you might have to make sure that I'm sure that a lot of people in your company itself would have a lot of great ideas which could have been explored or which would have already been explored. So how such kind of mechanisms can be created to make sure that this can actually flourish?
So within our organization, yes, the intrapreneurship is very much supported. In fact, there are lots of little businesses, lots of experiments that are happening in various parts of the business, which are like startups within the group.
Yeah.
And because they're within the group, you may not hear so much about it. Because they're funded by the group themselves, you don't hear so much about it. Otherwise, you would hear, oh, so-and-so raised money, and so-and-so raised some more money, and so on. So, but that all happens within the ambit of the group. Outside the group, there are different ways in which we encourage startups. One is, of course, if they have solutions which we are happy to let them experiment at our facilities. If their solutions have reached a certain stage where they can take that benefit. I won't call ESL a startup, but we have on multiple occasions allowed them to, I shouldn't say allowed is almost like we are letting them do it. We partnered uh, to run trials on energy efficient equipment they had in Indian conditions. So if they got the technology from somewhere, they came and tested it out in our factory. When it was found suitable, they took it to wherever else they needed to take it to. So we are quite happy to offer an ecosystem where you can try your solutions out. If you have things that help more people join the bandwagon, well, we'll let you try it out. Then, of course, many of us are engaged through CII and FICCI in various areas of work. I chair the Circular Economy Committee. So one of the things we actively do is to give startups a platform to both learn from others as well as to share progress that they've made. And simply by being with larger organizations who participate, have access to possible clients and market. So we are quite happy to facilitate that, because we know that, lots of solutions will come from startups in the future, and give them as much opportunity as possible.
Okay. And do you have any rough numbers or startups that have come inside the Mahindra or something on those lines, intra as well as entrepreneur side?
I don't know whether we've ever consolidated numbers of that kind at all. I know that we've got projects in agriculture, projects in mobility, we've got projects in energy. In fact, we've got an entire department. In fact, it's called Mahindra Partners. They're like a venture capital organization incubating the smaller organization companies, businesses, till they can stand on their own feet and either go to IPO or whatever else happens with organizations that reach stage. In fact, recently Mahindra Logistics did its IPO. That was an example of a small organization, a business that started about 15 or 17 years ago, finally reaching a level at which it could go to IPO. So that's an ecosystem that exists within the group.
Okay. And then coming to one of the last questions that we generally have for a lot of young people who would be listening to this is on the lines of what kind of jobs and skills do you feel will be important, especially because sustainability has picked up, is not picking up, but has picked up at a lot of sectors. But and you do deal with all different kinds of services and manufacturing. So what kind of thought process do they need to keep while they are getting into any kind of sustainability, or they want to get into any kind of sustainability divisions?
So one has to break down the idea of sustainability. So if you break it down, if you say, okay, doing energy efficiency is doing sustainability work, then great. You either need to be a good electrical engineer or a good mechanical engineer. You need to be able to see how to create a system which is more energy efficient, not just the individual devices. So an engineering background always helps. That's not new. It's just that what you are doing now is somewhat newer than what you were doing before. That's energy efficiency. If you say renewable energy, setting up renewable energy is sustainability, then yes, whatever skills are required, both engineering skills or understanding, generation of renewable energy, making sure that they can be connected to the grid, more electrical engineering skills, I suppose, in that space. If you wish to create value from waste, then skills in the material management sphere. Skills that will help you figure out that, okay, if this is the material that is coming out as waste from this process, uh, which other process can this so-called waste become valuable for? Or how can this be treated so that, or treated or processed so that the material which has come out as a byproduct from one process becomes usable somewhere else? So chemistry, chemical engineering, materials management, things like that. So if you break down the action, break down sustainability into different kinds of actions, it's easier to identify skills. Typically, we tend to associate sustainability awareness, environmental awareness, etc., as being core sustainability skills, but implementation of projects actually is partly about environmental awareness, but more about technical awareness of the things that you wish to get done, or technical knowledge of the things that you wish to get done.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Mr. Anirban. Do you have some final comments for our listeners that you would like to share?
So, Puneet, who are the kinds of people you have as listeners on your podcast?
So we are trying to cater specifically to youth who are working in any field, and so that they understand in a better way how climate change, urban development, innovation, and sustainability can function. And the idea is them that they would understand in a better way how the future looks like in different aspects of it, as well as what kind of jobs that might come with whatever kind of service or product that might come up in future for those lines. So that is the kind of audience we are looking at.
Yeah, so for this audience, you would have heard old people like us saying that you are inheriting the world and you will make a difference because we couldn't, etc. All of which is true. But I suppose the lens one should use is that things that we are thinking about today, or technologies and solutions that are evolving today, will actually be available to people like you've just described for implementation. And adoption of these solutions in regular life, in work, in factories, in homes, in cities, is going to play a key role in our being able to solve the problem. So while one could, ask people to be conscious and take the clean solutions and so on, we will only solve the problem when these solutions become economically viable, so that you and I don't have to spend extra out of our pockets simply because we are climate conscious. But if the solutions themselves are viable economically, why extra? We will spend all that we have. There's no problem. And so it would be great if ways of scaling up implementation of solutions could be found. And there are always innovators. Guys like you are definitely innovators in the sustainability space. It's only when the innovators get going that the others have a chance to join the bandwagon. So we've learned that once you get started, it is easy to find out that you could do much more than what you originally thought was possible. Please get started. Do whatever you can do. Take whatever step you can take. And it's fortunate for us that we can go much further beyond what we originally think is possible.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Anirban. This was quite an insightful conversation about corporate sustainability and many more things. I'm sure our audience would have gained a lot of knowledge about the field, and it will help them in understanding what the future holds for them in corporate sustainability and in life, I guess. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
You have been listening to Understanding the Future podcast. To know more about Climate Center for Cities, visit us at www.c-q.niua.org and follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. The show is conceptualized, hosted, and produced by Puneet Gandhi. You can listen to the show on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, and Spotify. So don't forget to subscribe the podcast and share it with your friends and colleagues. Thank you and stay tuned for the next episode.